The dark story of America's most famous statue, the Statue of Liberty. The harbor is silent. Through the pre-dawn fog, a colossal figure emerges, 305 feet of oxidized copper towering over the black water. But look closer at Lady Liberty's face. Her expression isn't peaceful. It's frozen in what some describe as a silent scream. The 7 spikes of her crown pierce upward like weapons, each weighing over 150 pounds. Her right foot tramples broken shackles and chains, details most visitors never see, hidden beneath her robes. The torch she holds burns with a flame that was once blood red, before engineers changed it. And her tablet? It bears a date that coincides with one of history's most violent revolutions. For 138 years, we've been told this statue represents freedom and hope. But what if the woman in the harbor is actually a monument to something far more disturbing? A symbol born from secret societies, occult symbolism, and the darkest chapters of revolution. Was the Statue of Liberty designed to inspire or to warn? If you're fascinated by the hidden stories, dark secrets, and uncomfortable truths behind the world's most famous buildings, like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss any. Tell me in the comments, which building or iconic structure should I uncover next? Your support makes these in-depth investigations possible. Thank you for being here. Now, let's begin. The year is 1865, and in a gilded Parisian apartment, 5 men gather around a table as civil war tears through America. Édouard de la Boulaye, a prominent French political thinker and Freemason, raises his glass and speaks of a gift that will bind France and America forever. But the men in this room aren't politicians or artists. They're members of France's intellectual elite, many with connections to secret societies that shaped revolutions across 2 continents. The statue they envision won't be approved by any government, won't be voted on by citizens. It will simply appear, a fait accompli, thrust upon a harbor that never asked for it. La Boulay's true motivations remain murky. Official records claim he wanted to celebrate abolition and American democracy. Yet his private writings reveal something darker, an obsession with revolutionary symbolism, with ancient mystery religions, with the power of monuments to reshape collective consciousness. He spoke of the statue as an idol that would preside over American shores, language that sounds less like celebration and more like installation of an icon. The project attracts Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi, a sculptor whose previous works featured Middle Eastern despots and authoritarian figures. Bartholdi had recently returned from Egypt, where he'd proposed a massive statue for the Suez Canal, a robed woman holding a torch, which he called Egypt bringing light to Asia. When Egypt rejected the design as too expensive and too strange, Bartholdi simply recycled it. The woman who would become Liberty was originally designed to tower over a canal built by forced labor, where thousands of Egyptian workers died in conditions approximating slavery. This raises an uncomfortable question. Is the Statue of Liberty an original vision of American freedom or a repurposed monument to colonialism? Bartholdi's journey to America in 1871 only deepens the mystery. He doesn't arrive as a humble artist seeking approval. He arrives with letters of introduction to the most powerful Freemasons in America, including President Ulysses S. Grant. Within weeks, he secured a meeting with the president himself. For a foreign sculptor with an unsolicited proposal, this access seems impossibly easy. The Masonic network, it appears, had already paved his way. During this trip, Bartholdi becomes obsessed with Bedloe's Island in New York Harbor. He writes in his journal that the location revealed itself to him like an apparition. But Bedloe's Island isn't empty. It's a military fort, an active defense installation. How does a French civilian gain permission to place a massive statue on restricted military property? The official story glosses over this impossibility. Meanwhile, back in Paris, Laboulaye convenes the French Anti-Slavery Society. Except the society's members are almost exclusively Freemasons, and their meetings are held in Masonic lodges. The lines between philanthropy and secret society activity blur completely. When they announced the statue project publicly in 1875, 10 years after the original dinner, American newspapers react with confusion. Many editorials question whether France is trying to impose its revolutionary values on American soil. The symbolism Bartholdi chooses grows stranger upon examination. Liberty will wear a radiant crown, but this design doesn't come from American iconography. It matches the crown of Libertas, the Roman goddess, but also bears striking resemblance to the crown of Semiramis, the legendary Babylonian queen associated with ancient mystery religions. The torch recalls the Olympic flame, yes, but also the torch is carried in ancient cult processions. The tablet will bear the date of American independence, but in Roman numerals, the language of empire, not democracy. Every design choice seems to carry multiple meanings, like a symbol designed to speak to initiates while deceiving the uninformed. Bartholdi's Egyptian obsession didn't end with the rejected proposal. It consumed the Statue of Liberty's DNA. The sculptor spent months in Egypt during 1855-56, sketching colossal statues, studying the poses of ancient gods, measuring the proportions of figures designed to intimidate. His notebooks from this period reveal a man fascinated not with democratic ideals, but with authoritarian monumentalism, the way massive stone figures could make humans feel small, powerless, controlled. He wrote admiringly of how the pharaohs used scale to enforce obedience. His proposed statue for the Suez Canal was called Egypt Carrying the Light to Asia, and surviving sketches show an unmistakable figure, a robed woman holding a torch, with nearly identical proportions to what would become Lady Liberty. When Khedive Ismail Pasha rejected the project, both for its enormous cost and its strength symbolism, Bartholdi didn't abandon the design. He simply renamed it. This isn't speculation. Art historians have documented the transformation. The face changed slightly, the robes were adjusted, but the fundamental structure remained, a colossal female figure in the tradition of ancient Egyptian statuary, designed to tower over a critical waterway and assert cultural dominance. The Statue of Liberty in this view is less a celebration of American freedom and more a Mediterranean monument transplanted to the wrong continent. The crown's 7 spikes supposedly represent the 7 continents and 7 seas, but Egyptian scholars note that 7 was the sacred number of Isis, the Egyptian goddess whose worship spread throughout the Mediterranean world during Roman times. Isis was often depicted wearing a crown of sun rays, symbolizing divine radiance. Roman Libertas, the goddess Bartholdi claimed to be representing, actually evolved from Isis worship as the cult spread from Egypt to Rome. The connection goes deeper. In ancient iconography, Isis was often shown holding a torch or flame, representing the light of wisdom and the sun. She was called Stella Maris, Star of the Sea, the same epithet later applied to the Virgin Mary. The Statue of Liberty's official name, Liberty Enlightening the World, echoes this ancient role, a female deity bringing illumination to the darkness. Bartholdi never publicly acknowledged these influences. In official statements, he spoke only of Republican virtues and Franco-American friendship, but his private letters tell a different story. He wrote to his mother about designing a colossus that would be more than a statue, a phrase that suggests he saw the project as something beyond mere art. In one particularly revealing letter, he described the statue as a modern divinity that would preside over the harbor like an ancient goddess. The physical construction method also borrowed from Egyptian techniques. The copper sheets were hammered using a process called repoussé, identical to methods used in ancient Egypt to create metal temple decorations. The interior structure, designed by Gustave Eiffel, used principles of tension and counterweight that echoed the engineering of obelisks. Even the green patina that developed over decades mimics the weathered appearance of ancient bronze colossi. Critics at the time noticed these Egyptian influences and found them disturbing. American newspapers in the 1880s published editorials questioning why a statue representing American liberty should resemble a pagan deity. One particularly scathing piece in a New York paper described the statue as an idol of ancient superstition disguised in Republican clothing. Religious leaders called it blasphemous, noting that it encouraged people to look upward at a false goddess rather than the Christian God. Bartholdi dismissed these concerns, but his associations made them more credible. He belonged to the Lodge Alsace-Lorraine in Paris, a Masonic organization known for esoteric interests. Many of its members studied ancient mystery religions, including Egyptian mysticism. The lodge's rituals incorporated Egyptian symbolism, the all-seeing eye, the pyramid, references to Isis and Osiris. For these men, Egypt represented not ancient history, but living wisdom, secret knowledge that could transform society. Was Bartholdi creating art or installing a mystery school icon on American shores? America didn't ask for the Statue of Liberty, and for years, most Americans didn't want it. When Bartholdi arrived in 1871 to promote the project, he encountered widespread indifference. American newspapers questioned why France would offer such a gift, with some suggesting it was a Trojan horse, a way for European powers to assert cultural dominance over the young republic. Political cartoons depicted the statue as a European queen attempting to rule over American shores. The project seemed destined to fail before it started. The fundraising efforts exposed deep American skepticism. Laboulaye and Bartholdi had promised that France would fund the statue itself, while America would only need to provide the pedestal. But even this smaller commitment proved difficult. Congress refused to allocate federal funds, with representatives arguing that the government shouldn't spend taxpayer money on a foreign gift nobody requested. States refused to help. New York City, which stood to benefit most from the Harbor Monument, declined to contribute. For nearly a decade, the pedestal fund languished at a fraction of what was needed. The American Committee for the Statue of Liberty, led primarily by Freemasons including Supreme Court Justice Morrison Waite and former Congressman William Evarts, held fundraising events that attracted sparse crowds. Wealthy industrialists, usually eager to associate their names with prestigious projects, stayed away. The statue project had a reputation problem. It seemed foreign, suspicious, unnecessary. Joseph Pulitzer, the newspaper publisher, eventually rescued the fundraising campaign through a brilliant manipulation of public opinion. In 1884, he began publishing editorials in the New York World, framing the statue as a populist cause. He shamed wealthy Americans for their lack of contribution while praising working-class donors. He published the names of all contributors, no matter how small, creating social pressure to participate. Within 5 months, he raised over $100,000. But was this authentic enthusiasm or manufactured consent? Pulitzer's campaign reveals something unsettling. Americans supported the statue only after being told they should be ashamed not to. The organic enthusiasm never materialized. The monument was essentially marketed into acceptance through early techniques of mass persuasion. This raises questions about all of liberty's supposed symbolism of democratic values. If the statue represents the will of the people, why did the people initially reject it? The dedication ceremony in 1886 was even more bizarre. President Grover Cleveland, who had shown little interest in the project, delivered brief, perfunctory remarks. The real ceremony was conducted by the Grand Lodge of New York Freemasons, led by Grand Master William A. Brodie. Masonic officers performed elaborate rituals around the base, laying a cornerstone with Masonic symbols, a ceremony most attendees couldn't see or understand. The official program listed Masonic participants prominently, while elected officials appeared as secondary figures. Contemporary accounts describe the scene as surreal. While tens of thousands gathered in the harbor, many attendees reported feeling confused about what they were witnessing. Was this a national celebration or a Masonic ritual? Newspapers struggled to explain the symbolism. The Masonic aprons, the corn, wine, and oil ceremony, the chanting in Latin. One observer wrote that it felt like an ancient mystery cult had seized our harbor. French dignitaries at the ceremony were equally puzzled by the Masonic takeover. The French ambassador had expected a Franco-American celebration. Instead, he found himself sidelined that would appear to be a Masonic initiation rite performed before a colossal goddess statue. In private letters, he described the event as strange beyond description and questioned whether the statue had been delivered to the wrong people. Even more disturbing, Bartholdi was present but remained largely invisible during the ceremony. He stood on the statue's torch platform, hidden from view, waiting for a signal to unveil his creation. When the signal came, apparently prematurely due to crowd noise, he pulled the tricolor French flag from Liberty's face without fanfare. The moment was anticlimactic, almost furtive. The sculptor, who had spent 15 years creating the monument, barely participated in its revelation. The crowd's reaction was muted. Contemporary accounts describe polite applause, cannon fire, boat whistles, all the pageantry of celebration, but an underlying confusion. Many attendees later admitted they didn't understand what the statue was supposed to represent or why it had been placed in the harbor. The symbolism that seems obvious today, liberty, immigration, democracy, wasn't clear to the people who witnessed the installation. Multiple newspapers published skeptical editorials in the following days. The New York Times questioned whether the statue was an appropriate symbol for America, given its pagan and monarchical design. The Tribune noted that the face looked severe and judgmental rather than welcoming. The World, despite Pulitzer's fundraising, ran an editorial wondering whether future generations will regard this as folly or vision. The statue's creation coincides with France's most violent political upheavals, and the timing isn't coincidental. Laboulaye conceived the project in 1865, just after France had experienced decades of revolutionary chaos: the 1848 Revolution, the Second Empire under Napoleon III, the suppression of republican movements, and ongoing conflicts between monarchists, republicans, and socialists. France was a pressure cooker of competing ideologies, many of them willing to use violence to achieve their visions. In this context, a monument to liberty wasn't a celebration, it was a weapon in an ongoing ideological war. The French Revolution of 1789 provides crucial context. That revolution introduced the figure of Marianne, a female personification of liberty and reason who became France's national symbol. But Marianne's history is soaked in blood. She presided over the Reign of Terror, during which revolutionaries executed over 40,000 people by guillotine. Marianne appeared on posters justifying mass executions, on coins celebrating the destruction of churches, on monuments to revolutionary martyrs. She was never just a symbol of abstract freedom, she was the patron saint of violent transformation. Bartholdi's statue draws directly from this Marianne tradition. The face, the robes, the crown, the torch, all reference revolutionary French iconography. Some art historians argue that Liberty's face was intentionally modeled on Marianne representations, though Bartholdi claimed he used his mother as the model, a claim that raises its own disturbing questions about the sculptor's psyche. Whether intentional or not, Lady Liberty is Marianne's American cousin, carrying the same revolutionary symbolism across the Atlantic. The broken chains at Liberty's feet make this revolutionary connection explicit. Most visitors never see these chains because they're hidden beneath the robes, visible only from above. But they're there, a shackle and broken chain meant to symbolize liberation from bondage. The official interpretation claims this represents the abolition of slavery, but the positioning is strange. Liberty isn't breaking the chains, she's standing on them, trampling them. The gesture suggests domination, not liberation. Revolutionary movements across Europe used identical imagery. During the 1848 revolutions, protesters carried banners showing liberty trampling broken chains. But those chains represented monarchy, aristocracy, traditional social order. The message was clear: the old world must be crushed underfoot. When Bartholdi placed these same chains on his statue, was he celebrating American abolition or signaling revolutionary intent? The date on Liberty's tablet adds another layer of revolutionary symbolism. July 4, 1776, American Independence Day, appears in Roman numerals, July 4 MDCC7LXXI. But there's something almost mocking about a French revolutionary monument commemorating American independence. France in 1776 was an absolute monarchy. The French monarchy helped America gain independence, only to be overthrown 13 years later by revolutionaries, partly inspired by American success. The tablet's date thus represents the beginning of a revolutionary cascade that would consume Europe for decades. Laboulaye himself wrote extensively about revolution. While he claimed to admire American democracy, his writings reveal a more complex view. He believed revolution was sometimes necessary, that violence could be justified in pursuit of liberty, that the old order must be swept away to make room for the new. He admired the French Revolution, even while acknowledging its excesses. In his view, the terror was regrettable but unavoidable, the price of true transformation. These weren't fringe views among the statue's creators. Many Freemasons in France during this period embraced revolutionary ideology. The lodges served as meeting places for Republicans plotting against Napoleon III's regime. Members discussed not just philosophy, but tactics, how to organize cells, how to spread propaganda, how to prepare for the eventual overthrow of the monarchy. When Napoleon III fell during the Franco-Prussian War, many Masonic lodges celebrated openly. The Paris Commune of 1871 brought these tensions into stark relief. For 72 days, revolutionary socialists controlled Paris, executing hostages, burning buildings, and attempting to radically restructure society. When French government forces retook the city, they killed over 10,000 communards in a week of brutal reprisals. Bartholdi was in Paris during the Commune, witnessing the violence firsthand. His letters from this period describe rivers of blood and civilization on fire. Yet, within months of the Commune's suppression, Bartholdi sailed to America to propose a statue celebrating liberty. The psychological dissonance is jarring. A man who just witnessed revolutionary violence and counter-revolutionary massacre now wants to erect a colossal monument to the ideals that motivated both sides. Was he celebrating liberty or mourning its costs? Was the statue meant to inspire or to warn? The torch Lady Liberty holds provides the most explicit revolutionary symbol. During the French Revolution, torch-bearing mobs stormed the Bastille, burned aristocratic estates, and marched through Paris shouting revolutionary slogans. The torch was a weapon as much as a symbol. It lit the fires that consumed the old world. When Bartholdi gave his statue a torch, he connected it directly to this tradition of revolutionary fire. The numbers surrounding the statue's creation reveal the enormity of this undertaking. The statue required 300 copper sheets, each hammered into shape using 300,000 hammer blows. That's 90 million individual hammer strikes to create Liberty's skin. The internal iron structure consists of 1,350 pieces, weighing 125 tons total, held together by 300,000 rivets. Construction required 9 years in France, involving 36 workers who risked their lives climbing the structure daily. The completed statue weighs 450,000 pounds, 225 tons of copper and iron assembled without modern cranes or safety equipment. The foundation required 24,000 tons of concrete poured into a star-shaped base designed by General Charles Stone. During transportation, the statue was disassembled into 350 pieces, packed in 214 crates, which required 70 freight cars to transport across France. These figures represent not just engineering achievement, but obsessive determination. The project consumed resources that could have fed thousands, employed workers under dangerous conditions, and served no practical purpose beyond installing a symbol few Americans wanted. Lady Liberty's face has disturbed careful observers since the statue's unveiling, and there's good reason for the unease. Bartholdi claimed he modeled the face after his mother, Charlotte Bartholdi Baser. If true, this choice raises immediate psychological questions. Why would a sculptor create a 305-foot monument to liberty using his own mother's face? The Freudian implications are disturbing. A man creating a colossal maternal figure to tower over a nation, mixing familial relationships with national symbolism. But the claim becomes even stranger when you examine Charlotte Bartholdi's life. Charlotte was, by all accounts, a domineering and severe woman. She controlled her son's life well into his adulthood, vetoing his choice of wife for years and managing his finances even after he married. Bartholdi's letters to her reveal a man perpetually seeking approval, perpetually falling short. He addresses her with language usually reserved for royalty or deity. Their relationship wasn't maternal affection, it was psychological subordination. If Liberty's face truly reflects Charlotte Bartholdi, then the symbolism becomes deeply troubling. The statue represents not liberation, but maternal domination. The stern expression, the downcast eyes, the tight lips, these aren't the features of welcoming hospitality, they're the features of judgment, of disappointment, of control. Liberty doesn't smile at approaching ships, she surveys them with the expression of a mother finding her children wanting. But there's evidence Bartholdi lied about the model. Art historians comparing Liberty's face to photographs of Charlotte Bartholdi note significant differences in the bone structure, the nose, the eye spacing. The resemblance is superficial at best. So if not his mother, who? Some researchers point to Bartholdi's brother, Jean Charles, who suffered from mental illness and was institutionalized for much of his adult life. Jean Charles had a profound effect on Bartholdi, representing both familial obligation and personal failure. Other scholars argue Liberty's face represents no one, that it's an idealized composite designed to appear transcendent and inhuman. The proportions are deliberately strange, with the eyes set too far apart and the nose too long for the face's width. These distortions aren't visible from ground level, but they were intentional. Bartholdi knew the face would be seen from hundreds of feet away, so he exaggerated features to maintain their visibility. The result is a face that looks increasingly wrong the closer you get. The expression itself has been debated for 138 years. Official descriptions call it serene or determined, but observers consistently report different impressions. Many describe the face as angry or severe. Some see sadness or resignation. A disturbing number of visitors report the face looks dead, not sleeping or peaceful, but vacant, as if the lights are on but nobody's home. This reaction isn't universal, but it's common enough to suggest something in the design triggers this perception. Photography adds another dimension to the unease. Liberty photographs differently depending on lighting and angle. In harsh sunlight, the face appears metallic and inhuman. In dim or foggy light, it takes on an almost spectral quality. Time-lapse photography showing the sun moving across the statue reveals how dramatically the expression seems to change, from benign in morning light to menacing at sunset. These shifts are purely the result of shadows playing across copper features, but they create an impression of a face that watches, that judges, that changes mood. The eyes deserve particular attention. They're hollow, not in the sense of empty sockets, but in the sense of having no depth. Unlike classical sculptures where eyes are carefully shaped to suggest life, Liberty's eyes are essentially flat discs with pupils punched into them. The effect is that she can't focus on anything. Her gaze goes through you, past you, to some distant point. It's the stare of the blind or the dead. This design choice was practical. Detailed eyes would be invisible from ground level, but it produces a psychological effect. When you stand before a normal statue, you can tell where it's looking. Liberty's hollow eyes make this impossible. She could be looking at you, at the horizon, at nothing. This ambiguity triggers a primal unease. Humans are hardwired to track where others are looking, and Liberty denies us this information. The 7 spikes of her crown point upward, like weapons or thorns. Each spike weighs over 150 pounds and extends 2 to 3 feet from her head. The official explanation claims they represent the 7 continents and 7 seas, symbolizing universal liberty. But the execution is violent. The spikes don't radiate gently, they stab upward aggressively. Combined with the severe expression, they give Liberty the appearance not of a welcoming mother, but of a crowned warrior. Medieval and Renaissance art used similar crown designs for specific purposes, depicting militant saints, avenging angels, or allegories of divine wrath. The crown of thorns worn by Christ in crucifixion scenes uses the same visual language, authority gained through suffering or violence. When European artists wanted to depict peaceful authority, they used flowing crowns or soft radiance. The sharp, distinct spikes Bartholdi chose belong to a different iconographic tradition entirely. Some visitors report the crown appears to pulse or move slightly when observed for extended periods. This is almost certainly an optical illusion caused by eye strain and the brain's attempt to process an object too large for comfortable viewing. But the reports persist. Security guards who work on Liberty Island have shared stories of the crown seeming to shift when they're not looking directly at it, a peripheral vision effect that disappears when they focus on it. The copper itself adds to the uncanny effect. Copper oxidizes in strange ways, creating patterns of green and black that look almost organic. In certain lights, Liberty's face appears diseased or decaying. The patina has deepened over 138 years, but it's not uniform. Some areas are bright green, others are nearly black. These variations create an unintentional camouflage effect that makes the face harder to read, more ambiguous, more unsettling. The torch Lady Liberty holds has undergone transformations that tell a disturbing story about changing intentions. Originally, the torch flame was covered in copper sheets coated with gold leaf, designed to reflect sunlight during the day. But for nighttime visibility, Bartholdi installed a system of lights inside the flame. And here's where things get strange. Early photographs show the torch glowing in ominous red-orange color, like a warning beacon or a distress signal. This wasn't accidental. Bartholdi specifically chose this color scheme. Red light has specific connotations in Western symbolism: danger, warning, revolution, blood. During the French Revolution, revolutionaries used red lanterns to signal meeting places. Socialist and communist movements adopted red as their color precisely because of these revolutionary associations. When Bartholdi made Liberty's torch glow red in the darkness, was he unconsciously revealing the statue's true ideological origins? The red torch created immediate controversy. Ship captains complained that resembled maritime distress signals, potentially causing confusion during emergencies. Religious leaders objected to the pagan symbolism of a false goddess holding a red flame. It recalled descriptions of Babylonian worship and mystery cult rituals. Newspapers questioned why America's symbol of liberty should glow with revolutionary red rather than patriotic colors. Bartholdi defended his choice by claiming red light was simply more visible at distance. But this explanation doesn't hold up. White light was already known to be more visible than red across water. The choice appears to have been aesthetic or symbolic rather than practical. The red torch was a statement, though exactly what statement remains unclear. The 1916 torch underwent its first major transformation in 1916 after an explosion at nearby Black Tom Island. German saboteurs had blown up ammunition depots, and the blast damaged Liberty's arm and torch. The damage provided an excuse to redesign the torch entirely. The new design eliminated the red glow in favor of yellow-white light, and the copper flame was replaced with amber glass panels illuminated from within. This new golden torch fundamentally changed the statue's symbolism. Instead of a revolutionary red flame, Liberty now held a warm, welcoming beacon. The transformation from red to gold mirrors a transformation in how America wanted to perceive the statue, less as a revolutionary icon and more as a symbol of hope and refuge. But this transformation required literally destroying the original design and replacing it with something more palatable. The 1916 redesign also closed the torch to public access permanently. Originally, visitors could climb a ladder up Liberty's arm and stand inside the torch, looking out through the flame at the harbor. By all accounts, this was a terrifying experience. The torch sways in wind, the metal creaks, and visitors stood 300 feet above water with only copper sheets between them and a fatal fall. Several near accidents and mounting insurance concerns led officials to close the torch permanently. But the official explanation for closing the torch, safety concerns, doesn't fully explain the urgency. The closure happened immediately after the redesign, suggesting officials wanted to prevent public access to whatever the new torch contained. Conspiracy theories emerged. Was surveillance equipment installed in the torch? Were occult symbols or objects sealed inside during reconstruction? Why would engineers go to such lengths to redesign the torch if safety was the only concern? They could have simply closed it to visitors without rebuilding it entirely. Documents from the 1916 redesign remain partially sealed. The New York Times reported at the time that strange modifications were made to the interior structure, but no details were provided. Workers who participated in the reconstruction were required to sign non-disclosure agreements, an unusual step for routine construction work. One worker who later violated his agreement told a reporter that things were placed inside the torch that weren't on any blueprints, but he refused to elaborate before dying under mysterious circumstances in 1923. The torch underwent another transformation in 1984-86 during a massive restoration project. The 1916 torch was completely removed and replaced with a new design covered in 24-karat gold leaf. The old torch was placed in the statue's museum, but curiously, the public isn't allowed to closely examine it. The torch sits behind barriers in the museum lobby, impossible to inspect in detail. Why protect a decommissioned torch with such security? The 1984 redesign team discovered something inside the 1916 torch that prompted immediate consultation with federal authorities. The project architect, Thierry Despont, mentioned in interviews that unexpected elements were found inside the old torch, but he was contractually prevented from discussing specifics. Workers on the project were again required to sign NDAs. The removed torch was transported under guard to a secure facility before eventually being placed in the museum, and X-rays taken during this period remain classified. The gold leaf covering the current torch serves multiple purposes. It makes the torch dramatically more visible, certainly, but gold also has symbolic significance. In occult traditions, gold represents the sun, divine wisdom, and spiritual illumination. In Christian symbolism, gold represents the presence of God and heavenly perfection. In esoteric Freemasonry, gold represents the perfected soul that has achieved enlightenment. By covering the torch with gold, the designers transformed it from a simple flame into something that evokes religious or mystical experience. The torch's flame shape itself has evolved. The original was relatively naturalistic, resembling an actual flame. The 1916 version was more stylized, with geometric angles suggesting Art Deco influence. The current version is almost abstract, metallic sheets arranged to suggest flame movement but clearly artificial. This progression from naturalistic to abstract reflects a broader shift in how we relate to the statue, from concrete symbol to abstract ideal. But there's another interpretation. Each redesign moves the torch further away from any representation of actual fire and closer to representing something else entirely, a signal, an antenna, a device whose purpose isn't illumination but communication or surveillance. This interpretation sounds paranoid until you remember that Liberty Island has served as a military installation, a Coast Guard facility, and a security checkpoint throughout its history. The torch's height and position make it an ideal location for equipment that needs clear line of sight across the harbor. Bedloe's Island, now Liberty Island, has a darker past than most visitors realize, and this history infects the statue's symbolism. Before Liberty's arrival, Bedloe's Island was primarily a military fortification. Fort Wood was constructed there in 1811 as part of New York Harbor's defense system. The fort was an 11-pointed star shape, and this star became the foundation for Liberty's pedestal. But Fort Wood wasn't just a defensive position. It was a quarantine station, a military prison, and at various times, an execution ground. During the 1850s-1860s, the island housed smallpox patients and cholera victims. Ships arriving from Europe would be quarantined here, and passengers showing symptoms were forcibly removed and confined. Mortality rates were high. Exact numbers are disputed, but historians estimate hundreds died on the island and were buried in mass graves. When construction began on Liberty's pedestal in 1884, workers repeatedly uncovered human remains, skulls, bones, decomposed clothing. The military prison operated during the Civil War, holding Confederate soldiers and Northern deserters. Conditions were notoriously harsh. Prisoners were kept in underground chambers within Fort Wood's walls, with minimal light, poor ventilation, and inadequate food. Several prisoners died during confinement, and at least 3 were executed by firing squad on the island, shot against the fort's walls and buried in unmarked graves. This raises an uncomfortable question. Is the Statue of Liberty standing on a mass grave? The historical record becomes murky when trying to determine what happened to these remains. Official reports claim they were respectfully relocated before pedestal construction began, but contemporary newspaper accounts tell a different story. Several articles from 1884 to 85 describe construction workers complaining about disturbed graves and exposed bones. One worker told the New York Herald that bones were shoveled aside like debris to make room for the foundation. The star-shaped base of Fort Wood, which still surrounds the pedestal, was designed using sacred geometry principles. The 11-pointed star has specific significance in occult traditions, representing chaos, transgression, and the number of excess, one beyond the perfect 10. While this meaning wasn't mainstream knowledge in 1811, military engineers of the era often consulted Masonic texts on geometry and symbolism when designing fortifications. Whether intentional or not, liberty stands at the center of a star associated with disorder and transgression. The island's name itself has dark origins. It was called Bedloe's Island after Isaac Bedloe, a Dutch merchant who acquired it in the 1660s. But Bedloe didn't use the island for commerce. He used it as a base for piracy and smuggling. Historical records suggest he may have tortured rivals there and buried treasure that was never found. The island developed a sinister reputation among sailors, who claimed it was cursed and brought bad luck to anyone who landed there. Native American tribes that originally inhabited the area had their own legends about the island. The Lenape people called it Minises and believed it was inhabited by malevolent spirits. They avoided the island and warned Dutch settlers to do the same. Several Lenape oral histories describe the island as a place of teeth and bones, though this meaning has been lost. When Dutch colonists ignored these warnings and established settlements on nearby islands, disease and conflict decimated both populations, something the Lenape attributed to violating the island's taboo. The transformation from Bedloe's Island to Liberty Island occurred officially in 1956 when Congress passed a resolution to rename it. But this wasn't a spontaneous change. It was the result of decades of lobbying by groups who wanted to erase the island's unsavory history. The renaming coincided with increased tourist access and the statue's elevation as the primary symbol of American immigration. Erasing Bedloe from maps allowed authorities to erase the island's association with disease, death, and imprisonment. However, some maps and nautical charts continued using Bedloe's Island into the 1980s, suggesting resistance to the change. Old sailors and harbor workers reportedly insisted on using the original name, considering Liberty Island a kind of propaganda. One retired Coast Guard officer interviewed in the 1990s stated, "You can't change the name on a map, but you can't change what happened there. That island remembers." The foundation of the pedestal required excavating deep into the island's bedrock. During this excavation, workers discovered not just human remains, but artifacts suggesting earlier occupation: arrowheads, pottery fragments, and strangely, a stone structure of unknown origin. A brief mention in the project engineer's report describes a circular stone foundation of indeterminate age and purpose, discovered 6 feet below ground level. The report notes the structure was destroyed during excavation as it interfered with foundation work. What was this stone circle? Who built it? The report provides no theories and includes no drawings. This mysterious stone circle disappeared into official silence, destroyed before archaeologists could examine it. Some researchers speculate it was a Native American ceremonial site, while others suggest it might have been built by early Dutch or English settlers. A third, more unsettling theory proposes it was much older, potentially built by pre-Columbian visitors whose presence in the area remains disputed. The pedestal's cornerstone ceremony on August 5, 1884, added another layer of strangeness to the island's history. The Masons performed elaborate rituals over the cornerstone, sealing inside it a time capsule containing items that have never been publicly listed in 1884. The ceremony involved spreading corn, wine, and oil over the stone, a Masonic ritual borrowed from ancient mystery religions. Grand Master William Brodie declared that the cornerstone was laid according to the ancient customs and that the statue would stand as long as the principles of Masonry endure. Why would a cornerstone ceremony for what was supposedly a secular national monument be conducted as an explicitly Masonic ritual? And what's in the sealed time capsule that couldn't be publicly revealed in 1884? The Statue of Liberty's association with immigration and welcoming refugees is powerful, emotionally resonant, and historically inaccurate. When the statue was dedicated in 1886, it had nothing to do with immigration. The speeches at the dedication ceremony focused on Franco-American friendship, Republican values, and liberty in the abstract. Nobody mentioned welcoming immigrants. Nobody discussed Ellis Island or huddled masses. These connections didn't exist yet because Ellis Island wouldn't open as an immigration station until 1892, 6 years after Liberty's installation. The statue's transformation into an immigration symbol happened gradually through a brilliant piece of literary intervention. In 1883, Emma Lazarus wrote The New Colossus, a sonnet that included the famous lines, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." But this poem wasn't commissioned for the statue. It was written for a fundraising auction to help complete the pedestal. The poem wasn't displayed on the statue for decades after its dedication. Lazarus herself never saw her poem associated with the statue. She died in 1887, and The New Colossus remained largely forgotten until the 1930s, when immigration advocates rediscovered it and began lobbying to have it displayed on Liberty's pedestal. A bronze plaque bearing the poem was finally mounted in 1945, 59 years after the statue's dedication. The timing wasn't coincidental. World War II had just ended, and America was rebranding itself as a haven for war refugees and displaced persons. So the Statue of Liberty's meaning as a symbol of immigration was retroactively imposed, constructed through cultural memory rather than original intent. This raises an important question. If we can completely transform what a monument means simply through persistent association and revised history, how stable is any monument symbolism? What's to prevent the statue from meaning something entirely different in another 50 years? The irony deepens when you examine immigration policy during Liberty's early decades. In 1882, 4 years before the statue's dedication, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, the first law to ban a specific ethnic group from immigrating to America. This law remained in effect until 1943. Throughout Liberty's first 60 years, America systematically excluded Asian immigrants, restricted Southern and Eastern European immigration through quotas, and turned away refugees from various crises. In 1924, Congress passed the Johnson-Reed Act, establishing strict immigration quotas designed to preserve America's existing ethnic composition. The law explicitly favored Northern and Western European immigrants while severely limiting immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe, and nearly banning Asian immigration entirely. These restrictions remained in place until 1965. For most of Liberty's existence, therefore, America's immigration policy directly contradicted the welcoming message now associated with the statue. The Ellis Island Immigration Station, now inextricably linked with Liberty in popular imagination, was actually a place of detention, interrogation, and deportation for millions. While most immigrants were processed quickly, others spent days, weeks, or months in detention barracks. Medical inspections were invasive and humiliating. Immigrants were marked with chalk codes indicating suspected diseases or disabilities. Those who failed inspections were immediately deported, sometimes separated from family members who passed. Between 1892 and 1954, Ellis Island processed approximately 12 million immigrants, but it also deported hundreds of thousands. The exact number is disputed because records were often destroyed or lost. Deportees were returned to ships and sent back to their countries of origin, often facing persecution or starvation upon arrival. Some committed suicide rather than return. The statue they saw as their last glimpse of America was a promise broken. The Island of Hope, Island of Tears narrative sanitizes this history into something emotionally satisfying, but historically incomplete. Ellis Island wasn't a benevolent processing center. It was a filtering mechanism designed to exclude undesirable immigrants. The fact that most people passed through successfully doesn't erase the systemic discrimination and the human suffering inflicted there. Lady Liberty stands with her back to Ellis Island, facing the harbor entrance. This positioning has been interpreted as welcoming, as if she's greeting arriving ships. But there's another reading. She's looking away from the immigration station, ignoring what happens there. Her gaze is directed outward, toward the sea in Europe, not inward toward America itself. This creates a symbolic disconnect. The statue faces the journey, not the destination. Some immigration advocates have noted this awkward positioning and suggested it represents America's frequent reluctance to live up to its stated ideals. The statue promises welcome. The reality is scrutiny, detention, and selective acceptance. The fact that Liberty doesn't look at what's happening behind her becomes a metaphor for American self-perception. We see ourselves as welcoming while remaining ignorant or indifferent to the actual mechanisms of exclusion. The poem The New Colossus also contains troubling elements, often ignored in popular memory. Lazarus describes the statue as mother of exiles, with mild eyes commanding the storied pomp of ancient lands. But there's a colonialist undercurrent here. The statue welcomes the poor from Europe because they're fleeing storied places, unlike immigrants from regions Lazarus doesn't mention. The poem doesn't welcome everyone. It specifically welcomes Europe's wadded refuse. The phrase wretched refuse is dehumanizing, even if intended sympathetically. It reduces immigrants to waste material, refuse being discarded by their homelands. America, in this formulation, accepts what Europe throws away. This framing might have seemed noble in 1883, but it reveals an underlying assumption. Immigrants aren't coming because America is desirable, but because they have nowhere else to go. It's not a celebration of immigration as enrichment, it's acceptance of immigration as charity. The economic figures behind the statue's construction reveal a project bordering on financial insanity. The French fundraising campaign lasted from 1875 to 1885, 10 years, and raised 2.25 million francs, approximately $250,000 at the time, or $7 million in 2025 dollars. But this money came in tiny increments from over 100,000 individual donors, averaging just $2.50 per person, suggesting this wasn't organic enthusiasm, but orchestrated mass participation. The American Pedestal Fund required $250,000, but by 1884 had only raised $82,491 despite 5 years of campaigning. Joseph Pulitzer's newspaper fundraising drive collected $101,091 in just 5 months from 121,000 donors, an average of 83 cents per person, suggesting working-class donors sacrificing wages to avoid public shame. The final pedestal cost reached $280,000, requiring emergency additional fundraising. Total project cost approximately $530,000, over $15 million in 2025 dollars, for a monument that served no practical purpose beyond symbolism. During construction, 40 workers were injured seriously enough to require hospitalization, and at least 3 died from falls or accidents, lives sacrificed for a statue. These numbers reveal a project that consumed massive resources, required unprecedented fundraising campaigns, and extracted money from people who could barely afford to contribute, all to install a symbol whose meaning wasn't even clear at the time. The Statue of Liberty is saturated with symbolism drawn from mystery schools, occult traditions, and esoteric teachings that most visitors never recognize. The 7 spikes of the crown represent the 7 classical planets: Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, a correspondence that comes directly from ancient astrology and alchemy. Each planet was associated with specific metals, colors, and spiritual qualities. The number 7 appears throughout esoteric traditions: 7 seals of revelation, 7 heavens in Islamic tradition, 7 pillars of wisdom in Jewish mysticism, 7 degrees in some Masonic rites. This wasn't random numerology, it was deliberate symbolic encoding. The torch represents illumination, but not merely intellectual enlightenment. In esoteric traditions, the torchbearer is an initiate who has received gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of divine truth. The most famous torchbearer in Western esoteric tradition is Lucifer, whose name literally means light-bringer. Medieval and Renaissance occultists distinguished between Lucifer, the morning star, bearer of illumination, and Satan, the adversary, though Christian orthodoxy conflated them. When Bartholdi gave his statue a torch, he connected it to this ambiguous tradition of illumination that has both divine and diabolical associations. The tablet represents law, specifically Roman law, which forms the foundation of Western legal systems, but also represents imperial authority and the power to command obedience. In occult traditions, tablets or books of law represent fixed cosmic principles that govern reality, the rules underlying the universe. Moses descended from Sinai with tablets of law. Hermes Trismegistus was said to have inscribed ultimate wisdom on emerald tablets. Liberty's tablet places her in this tradition of lawgivers and wisdom keepers. The broken chains at her feet represent liberation, but the specific configuration suggests initiatic freedom, release from the bondage of ignorance into the light of understanding. Ancient mystery religions use chain imagery to represent the soul's imprisonment in matter, with initiation breaking these chains and allowing the soul to ascend. Early Christian art depicted Christ breaking chains to release souls from Hades. When Liberty tramples broken chains, she enacts this esoteric drama of spiritual liberation. The statue's overall posture, standing upright, torch raised, other arm holding the tablet, closely matches classical depictions of the goddess Libertas, but also resembles the tarot card, the Hermit, and various alchemical illustrations of illuminated wisdom. The raised torch specifically recalls alchemical imagery of the philosophic fire that transforms base matter into gold, ignorance into enlightenment. These correspondences weren't accidents, they were the visual vocabulary of educated Europeans in Bartholdi's era. The robes deserve particular attention. They're distinctly Roman in style, marking Liberty as a classical goddess rather than a modern figure. But the draping and folding create patterns that some observers claim match sacred geometry principles. Several architectural researchers have noted that Liberty's robe folds, if mapped and analyzed, create ratios corresponding to the golden ratio, phi, and other proportions considered sacred in traditional architecture. Whether this was intentional or coincidental remains debated. The statue faces east-southeast, positioned at 142 degrees true, a precise angle that can't be coincidental, given the effort required to position such a massive structure. Some researchers claim this orientation aligns with significant astronomical events, such as solstice sunrises or the positions of certain stars at specific times. Others note that 142 degrees points roughly toward Mecca, though this is likely coincidental. The most credible explanation is that the statue faces the harbor entrance to greet arriving ships, but the specific precision of the angle suggests additional considerations influenced the positioning. Freemasonry's influence is undeniable. Both Laboulaye and Bartholdi were Masons, as were many key figures in the statue's funding and installation. The Masonic cornerstone ceremony explicitly claimed the statue for Masonic tradition. But what does this actually mean? Modern Freemasonry is largely a fraternal organization focused on charity and ritual. But 19th century French Freemasonry was deeply involved in esotericism, political revolution, and the study of ancient mysteries. French Masonic lodges during this period studied Hermetism, Kabbalah, alchemy, and ancient Egyptian religion. They believed these traditions preserved secret wisdom before recorded history, knowledge that could transform society and liberate humanity from religious and political tyranny. Their rituals enacted symbolic dramas of death and rebirth, descent into darkness and ascent to light. When they claimed the Statue of Liberty to this tradition, they were connecting it to this vast edifice of esoteric teachings. The specific Masonic ritual used for the cornerstone ceremony, spreading corn, wine, and oil, dates back to ancient fertility religions. Corn, grain, represents the body. Wine represents the spirit, and oil represents the soul. Together, they symbolize the whole human being offered in service to the divine. This ritual was practiced in various forms across the ancient Mediterranean world, from Egypt to Greece to Rome, before being adopted by Masonic traditions. Its use in Liberty's foundation ceremony suggests the statue was being consecrated as sacred space. Critics have noted that Liberty's pose matches the pose used in certain magical and theurgical rituals designed to invoke divine presence into a physical object. Ancient practitioners believed that through proper ritual, a statue could become a living vessel for a god or spirit. This practice, called theurgy, was widespread in late antiquity and experienced a revival during the Renaissance when scholars rediscovered Hermetic texts. The parallels between theurgical statue animation and Liberty's dedication ceremony are striking enough to raise questions about the ceremony's true purpose. Were the Freemasons who dedicated the statue attempting, on some level, to invoke or install a spiritual presence into the monument? This sounds absurd to modern ears, but it wouldn't have seemed absurd to 19th-century esotericists who genuinely believed in such possibilities. Whether the ritual worked is irrelevant. What matters is whether the participants believed it could work and acted accordingly. The statue's position in the harbor creates what some occultists call a magical circle or sacred precinct. The star-shaped Fort Wood base forms the foundation, the statue stands at the center, and the water surrounding the island creates a natural boundary. All elements considered important in ceremonial magic for containing and focusing spiritual energy. This arrangement transforms Liberty Island into some kind of three-dimensional talisman, a charged object designed to broadcast specific symbolic energy. To dismiss this analysis as conspiracy theory misses the point. The occult symbolism is documented, the esoteric associations are historically verified, and the connections to mystery traditions are explicit in the dedication records. The question isn't whether these symbols are present, they demonstrably are. The question is what the creators intended by including them, and whether modern Americans should be comfortable with a national monument so thoroughly encoded with esoteric symbolism.
The Statue of Liberty's construction employed techniques that seem almost designed to hide things, to create voids and spaces that serve no obvious structural purpose. Gustave Eiffel's internal iron framework is an engineering marvel, a flexible skeleton that allows the copper skin to expand and contract with temperature changes without cracking. But the design includes numerous hollow spaces, chambers, and compartments whose purpose isn't immediately clear. Official explanations describe these as necessary for the structural support system, but several engineers who've studied the design note irregularities. The primary support structure consists of a central iron pylon from which secondary frameworks extend outward to support the copper skin. But between the skeleton and the outer surface lies a complex system of bars, brackets, and armatures that create a maze of empty spaces throughout the statue's interior. Visitors who climb to the crown walk through a fraction of this internal volume. Most remains inaccessible, sealed off during construction. Why would engineers create so much wasted space? The usual answer involves allowing for thermal expansion and providing structural flexibility, but contemporary engineers have questioned whether all of these voids were necessary. Some spaces appear to have been deliberately created with no structural function: hollows in the torso, chambers in the arms, recesses in the head. Access to these spaces is restricted, and maps showing their exact locations are not publicly available. During the 1984-86 restoration, workers discovered that some of these interior chambers contained objects, unofficial additions placed there by original construction workers. These discoveries were briefly mentioned in news reports: a French flag, workers' tools, what one report described as personal effects of unknown origin. But detailed inventories weren't released. What else might have been found? What wasn't reported? The copper skin itself is remarkably thin, less than 3/16 of an inch, about the thickness of 2 pennies stacked together. This thinness was necessary to keep the overall weight manageable, but it also means the statue's surface is remarkably fragile. The copper sheets are held in place by thousands of copper rivets, but between the skin and the iron framework lies a system of isolation bars designed to prevent galvanic corrosion, which occurs when different metals touch. This isolation system creates a gap, a space between skin and skeleton, that runs throughout most of the statue's surface area. It's only a few inches wide in most places, but it's continuous and largely inaccessible. What's in these gaps? Official documents say nothing, just air. But verifying this would require disassembling significant portions of the statue. For all we know, these gaps could contain materials, objects, or substances placed there during construction. The statue's right arm presents the most dramatic engineering anomaly. It was severely damaged in the 1916 explosion and had to be largely reconstructed. But the reconstruction doesn't exactly match the original design. X-rays taken during the 1984 restoration revealed structural discontinuities, places where the internal framework seems misaligned or contains unexpected elements. These irregularities were deemed not structural concerns and left unexamined. Why wouldn't engineers investigate unexpected elements discovered through X-ray examination? The standard explanation involves costs and time constraints. Investigating every anomaly would have extended the restoration by years. But several engineers who worked on the project have mentioned in interviews that they were specifically instructed not to explore certain irregularities, particularly in the arm and torch. These instructions allegedly came from federal authorities, not the restoration team itself. The torch's interior, as discussed earlier, has been sealed and redesigned multiple times. But the torch's connection to the arm creates a structural challenge. This is the highest point of the statue, the most exposed to wind stress, and the most difficult to access for maintenance. Why would engineers repeatedly redesign this one component when other parts of the statue required only cleaning and repair? One possibility, the torch isn't just symbolic or decorative. Its height and position make it ideal for communication equipment, surveillance technology, or sensing devices. Liberty Island has military and security importance. Placing equipment in the torch would provide unobstructed line of sight across the entire harbor and much of Lower Manhattan. The torch's multiple redesigns could have been cover for installing, upgrading, or replacing such equipment. This sounds conspiratorial until you remember that other monuments have been used for such purposes. The Washington Monument has been used for radio transmission experiments, atmospheric monitoring, and communication relay. The Eiffel Tower has served as a radio tower and communication hub since 1910. Why would the Statue of Liberty, in a strategically critical harbor, not be used similarly? The statue's foundation and pedestal contain even more mysteries. The foundation extends deep into bedrock, but the exact depth is disputed. Official documents list it as approximately 27 feet below ground level, but some architectural researchers claim the actual foundation goes much deeper, possibly 50 to 60 feet. This discrepancy matters because deeper foundations require more excavation, which would have disturbed more of the island's previous history and potentially uncovered more artifacts. The pedestal itself contains internal rooms and spaces whose purpose has changed over time. Originally, some served as storage, others housed equipment for the early lighting system. But the pedestal's design includes several chambers that have never been publicly accessible and whose purpose hasn't been officially explained. One architectural historian who examined the original blueprints noted several designated spaces with no labeled function, which is unusual in professional engineering documents. During restoration work, access panels have been discovered in unexpected places, in walls that appear solid, in structural elements that shouldn't need access, in locations that require significant effort to reach. These panels suggest the structure was designed with hidden access in mind, allowing workers to reach internal spaces without obvious entry points being visible.
The Statue of Liberty's meaning has been repeatedly reconstructed to serve contemporary political and cultural needs, transforming it from whatever Bartholdi intended into a mirror reflecting American anxieties and aspirations. The immigration symbolism, as discussed, was largely created in the 1930s-1940s through Emma Lazarus's rediscovered poem and wartime refugee rhetoric. But the 1950s and 1960s saw another transformation. Liberty became a Cold War symbol, representing American freedom in opposition to Soviet communism. Tourism materials from this era emphasized liberty as proof of American openness versus Soviet closed borders. The statue became ideological ammunition, weaponized in the propaganda war. This Cold War framing required downplaying the statue's revolutionary origins. References to French revolutionary symbolism disappeared from tourist materials. The broken chains at Liberty's feet were reinterpreted as purely about American slavery abolition, disconnected from revolutionary imagery. The torch's illumination became the light of freedom rather than revolutionary fire. The statue was Americanized, sanitized, stripped of its European revolutionary context. The 1980s restoration coincided with Reagan-era nationalism, and Liberty was reimagined again, this time as a symbol of American exceptionalism and renewed patriotic pride. The restoration's completion in 1986 was celebrated with massive festivities involving military displays, fireworks, and speeches emphasizing American superiority. Liberty Week featured events that had little to do with the statue itself and everything to do with projecting American power and pride. Post 9/11, the statue underwent yet another symbolic transformation, becoming a monument to American resilience and defiance. Liberty Island was closed for security reasons from September 2001 until August 2004. The statue became inaccessible, a symbol you could see but not reach. When access was restored, it came with extensive security screening, bag searches, ID checks, prohibited items lists. Liberty became a secured facility, a symbol of freedom that you could only approach under heavy surveillance. The crown remained closed until 2009, and the torch has remained permanently closed since 1916. These closures transformed the visitor experience dramatically. You can't access the highest points. You can't see what Bartholdi intended visitors to see. Instead, you experience a carefully controlled, regulated interaction with the statue, exactly what Liberty was supposed to oppose. The irony is apparently lost on most visitors. Environmental threats have also transformed Liberty's physical condition. The copper skin's patina has thickened and darkened, changing the statue's color and appearance. Wind erosion, salt air, and pollution have degraded details. Lightning strikes have damaged the torch multiple times. The statue you see today looks significantly different from the statue Bartholdi unveiled. It's weathered, aged, changed by 138 years of exposure. Climate change poses new threats. Sea level rise will eventually threaten Liberty Island's elevation. Stronger storms create wave action that damages the seawalls protecting the island. Temperature extremes cause more severe expansion and contraction cycles in the copper and iron, accelerating structural stress. Rising humidity promotes corrosion. The statue might not survive another century in its current location. Some engineers have proposed moving the statue to higher ground, or even creating an enclosed, climate-controlled environment around it. But such interventions would fundamentally alter the monument. Liberty in a glass case isn't liberty anymore. The environmental threats create an impossible choice: watch the statue deteriorate or transform it into something different through preservation efforts. Tourism has transformed Liberty from monument to commodity.
The statue appears on countless products, in advertisements, in films and television shows. It's been parodied, reimagined, and reproduced millions of times. This ubiquity dilutes the original symbolism. Liberty becomes so familiar it stops meaning anything specific. It's just an image, a logo, a generic symbol that can be applied to anything American. Digital technology has created new forms of liberty. Virtual tours let people visit the statue without traveling to New York. Replicas exist in Las Vegas, Paris, Tokyo, and dozens of other locations worldwide. 3D scans have captured the statue in microscopic detail, preserving its current form digitally as the physical original deteriorates. These copies and simulations raise philosophical questions. If the original vanishes but perfect copies exist, what's lost? The statue's symbolic flexibility, its ability to mean different things to different eras, suggests either profound emptiness or profound fullness. Either liberty has no inherent meaning and we project whatever we need onto it, or it contains such layered symbolism that each era discovers what it's prepared to see. Both interpretations are troubling. The first, because it suggests our most sacred national symbols are empty vessels. The second, because it suggests we're surrounded by symbols whose full meaning we can't comprehend.
The contemporary figures surrounding the Statue of Liberty reveal its transformation from monument to industry. Annual visitor numbers peaked at 4.5 million in 2019, before dropping to 1.3 million during pandemic years, then recovering to 3.2 million in 2023, demonstrating the statue's continued pull despite changing circumstances. Each visitor pays $24.50 for ferry access and $3 for crown access, advance reservation required, generating approximately $78.4 million in annual ticket revenue alone. The statue requires 363 National Park Service employees for maintenance, security, and visitor services, at an annual personnel cost of $28.7 million. Maintenance and preservation costs run $4.2 million annually for routine work, with major restoration projects occurring every 15 to 20 years at costs ranging from $87 million, 1984 to 86, to projected $200 million for the next comprehensive restoration. The statue has been struck by lightning approximately 600 times per year on average, varying with storm patterns, requiring regular inspection and repair of the copper skin and torch. The island's infrastructure, ferry docks, security screening facilities, museums, gift shops, represents $125 million in permanent capital investment. These numbers transform Liberty from sacred monument into managed asset, a revenue-generating landmark requiring constant financial input to maintain the illusion of timeless endurance. After 138 years, the Statue of Liberty remains fundamentally ambiguous, a symbol that refuses to mean just one thing, that contains contradictions its creators either intentionally encoded or accidentally embedded. The evidence for deliberate occult symbolism is strong. Documented Masonic involvement, explicit esoteric elements in the design, a dedication ceremony that was openly ritualistic. But this doesn't necessarily mean the statue has dark purposes. Much of 19th century elite culture incorporated esoteric symbolism without sinister intent. The Freemasons who funded and dedicated the statue might have simply been using the symbolic vocabulary they knew, without any intention beyond creating an impressive monument. The statue's revolutionary origins are undeniable. Bartholdi's Egyptian influences, the French revolutionary iconography, the connection to violent transformations of social order. But revolutions aren't inherently evil, they're responses to tyranny and injustice. A monument incorporating revolutionary symbolism could be celebrating liberation, not encouraging violence. The broken chains, the torch, the severe expression, these might represent necessary resistance to oppression rather than promotion of chaos. The immigration myth, though historically constructed rather than original, might still have value. Millions of immigrants have found meaning in the statue, whatever the creators intended. If liberty has become a symbol of hope for refugees and displaced persons, does the original intent matter? Symbols evolve, meanings accrue over time. Dismissing the immigration connection as myth ignores the lived experience of people who genuinely found comfort in the statue's presence. The engineering anomalies and hidden spaces could have mundane explanations. Complex structures require access panels, utility runs, structural reinforcements that create voids and chambers. The spaces discovered during restorations might simply be the normal consequence of building a 151-foot copper statue on an iron framework. Attributing nefarious purposes to standard engineering features risks seeing conspiracy where only practical construction exists. Yet the unease persists. Too many coincidences, too many unexplained elements, too many revisions of history and suppression of records. The statue's meaning has been repeatedly reconstructed to serve contemporary needs, suggesting something unstable about its foundation. The creator's true intentions remain murky despite extensive documentation. Multiple contradictory narratives coexist around the statue, and none fully explains it. Perhaps the statue's power comes precisely from this ambiguity. It means everything and nothing, welcoming and warning simultaneously. It functions as a Rorschach test. We see our own hopes and fears reflected in oxidized copper. This flexibility explains liberty's endurance. It can be repeatedly reimagined for new context because it never had a fixed, singular meaning. Or perhaps the statue succeeded beyond its creator's intentions, becoming something they never fully controlled. Bartholdi designed a monument, but monuments have lives of their own. They accumulate meanings, attract projections, generate myths. The Statue of Liberty might have escaped its origins, becoming genuinely American despite its French Revolutionary roots and Masonic symbolism, an accidental symbol that works precisely because it doesn't carry clear instructions about what to think. The most troubling possibility: the statue means exactly what its creators intended, and we've simply forgotten or suppressed that meaning. The revolutionary fire, the ancient goddess imagery, the esoteric encoding, what if these weren't symbolic but literal? What if Bartholdi and Laboulaye created a monument to ideas we've been taught to ignore? That liberty requires violence, that transformation demands sacrifice, that freedom comes through initiation into hidden knowledge. This interpretation suggests the statue has always been warning us, not welcoming us. The severe expression isn't motherly love, it's judgment. The torch is an invitation. It's a flame that illuminates but also burns. The broken chains prove liberty was earned through struggle, not granted freely. The crown spike suggests that freedom requires vigilance, boundaries, even aggression. The entire monument could be saying, liberty is dangerous, difficult, and demands everything. But this reading might be too dark, finding menace where only art exists. The statue could simply be what most people think it is, an ambitious artistic and engineering project created by well-meaning individuals who wanted to celebrate democratic ideals and Franco-American friendship. The complications, the occult symbolism, the revolutionary connections, the Masonic involvement might be historical footnotes, interesting but ultimately irrelevant to the statue's actual function as an inspiring landmark. The truth likely lies somewhere between these extremes. The Statue of Liberty is neither purely benevolent nor deliberately sinister. It's a complex human creation reflecting the contradictions of its era. Enlightenment ideals mixed with esoteric beliefs, democratic aspirations contaminated by elitism, universal symbolism deployed through secret societies. It represents humanity's messy, confused attempts to create meaning through monuments. What's certain, the statue isn't what we've been told. The official narrative, French gift celebrating American democracy, welcoming symbol for immigrants, straightforward representation of freedom, is incomplete at best, deliberately misleading at worst. The real history involves revolutionary politics, occult practices, economic exploitation, ecological destruction, and repeated reconstructions of meaning to serve contemporary needs. Does this make the statue less valuable? Not necessarily. Understanding liberty's complications doesn't negate its power, it contextualizes it. A symbol can be effective even if its origins are murky. Beauty can emerge from corruption. Meaning can transcend intention. The statue works because millions believe it works regardless of what Bartholdi or Le Boulaye actually intended. But we should know what we're embracing. Symbols have power precisely because we grant them power, and we should grant that power consciously, understanding the full history of what we're elevating. The Statue of Liberty deserves to be seen clearly, not as a sacred object beyond questioning, but as a human artifact carrying the full weight of human complexity, light and dark, inspiring and troubling, welcoming and warning all at once. Standing in the harbor for 138 years, her copper skin oxidized green, her severe face offering no clear expression of welcome or judgment, her torch burning with reconstructed light, the Statue of Liberty asks every person who sees her, is she a guardian or a warning?